The morning sun filtered through the blinds as Mei Lin checked her bag one last time. Her hands trembled slightly as she zipped the small carry-on shut. 6 months had passed since she'd last seen her sister, and the thought of finally hugging her again after all this time made her heart race. But beneath that excitement lurked something else, a heaviness that had been growing for weeks. Mei glanced at the orange prescription bottle on her nightstand. The little white pills inside seemed to stare back at her accusingly. 3 weeks ago, she'd stopped taking them. The side effects had become unbearable, the constant fog in her mind, the way colors seemed duller, the strange disconnection from her own emotions. Her doctor had warned against stopping abruptly, but Mei had convinced herself she was finally strong enough to manage without them. "I'm fine," she whispered to her empty apartment. "I'm completely fine." The ride to Denver International Airport was uneventful. Her rideshare driver, an older man with kind eyes, asked if she was heading somewhere exciting. "Just visiting family," Mei replied, her voice sounding distant even to her own ears. She hadn't slept properly in days. Every time she closed her eyes, her thoughts raced like wild horses, galloping from one idea to the next without pause. At the airport, everything seemed too bright, too loud. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. Announcements echoed through the terminal, each word stretching and distorting in her ears. Mei clutched her boarding pass tightly, the paper growing damp from her sweaty palm. Flight 2187 to New York was boarding on time. Mei stood in line, her carry-on pulled close to her body like a shield. A businessman in front of her talked loudly on his phone about quarterly reports. A young couple behind her whispered and giggled, their happiness an almost physical force pushing against her back. "Boarding pass, please," said the gate agent, a woman with tightly pulled back hair and a professional smile. Mei handed over her crumpled ticket. The agent's eyes flickered briefly to Mei's face, perhaps noticing the dark circles under her eyes or the slight twitch in her left cheek, but she said nothing. "Have a pleasant flight," the agent said, handing the boarding pass back. Mei nodded and moved forward, stepping onto the jetway that would carry her 30,000 feet into the air, trapped in a metal tube with nowhere to escape. On board, Mei found her seat, 14C, an aisle seat. She preferred windows usually, but all the window seats had been taken when she booked her last-minute ticket. A gray-haired woman already occupied the window seat, her nose buried in a paperback thriller. The middle seat remained empty for now. Mei stowed her bag in the overhead compartment and sat down. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to break free. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the breathing exercises her therapist had taught her. In for 4 counts. Hold for 7. Out for 8. But her lungs wouldn't cooperate, taking in shallow, rapid gulps of the recycled cabin air. "First time flying?" The gray-haired woman had lowered her book, eyeing Mei with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "No," Mei replied. "I fly all the time, just not sleeping well lately." The woman nodded sympathetically. "I never sleep well before trips either. Too much to remember, too much that could go wrong." If only she knew, Mei thought. The things going wrong in her head were far more complex than forgotten toothbrushes or missed connections. A young man arrived at their row, their middle seat companion for the flight. He smiled politely as he squeezed past Mei to take his place. The closeness of strangers made Mei's skin prickle with discomfort. The final passengers boarded. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking seatbelts and overhead bins. One of them, a tall man with a gentle face and Lee on his name tag, paused near Mei's row. "Everything all right, ma'am?" he asked, his eyes lingering on her white-knuckled grip on the armrests. "Fine," Mei said quickly. "Just a bit nervous today." Flight attendant Lee smiled. "We've got clear skies all the way to New York. Should be a smooth ride." But it wasn't the turbulence Mei feared. It was the storm building inside her own mind. The safety demonstration began. Mei watched with unusual intensity as the flight attendants showed how to fasten seatbelts, where to find emergency exits, how to use oxygen masks. The routine information suddenly seemed crucial, life or death knowledge that she needed to absorb completely. "In the unlikely event of a water landing," the lead flight attendant was saying, but Mei's mind suddenly latched onto the word unlikely. How did they determine what was likely or unlikely? Who decided what counted as a reasonable fear versus an irrational one? The thoughts spiraled faster. The plane began to taxi. Outside the window, the morning sun gleamed off the wings. Mei felt sweat beading on her forehead. The engines roared louder as they approached the runway. The noise filled her head, pushing out rational thought. Her breathing quickened. "You really don't like flying, do you?" the young man next to her asked, noticing her distress. May couldn't answer. Words had become slippery things, impossible to grasp. The plane accelerated down the runway, pressing May back into her seat. As they lifted off the ground, she felt a strange detachment, as if she were watching herself from somewhere else in the cabin. "They don't know," she whispered. The words slipped out before she could catch them. "Pardon?" The young man leaned slightly away from her. May shook her head and turned away. She hadn't meant to speak aloud. The thoughts were coming too fast now, connections forming between unrelated things. The pattern of clouds outside the window. The rhythm of the engines. The way the flight attendant Lee had looked at her. They all meant something. They were all trying to tell her something important. The seatbelt sign dinged off once they reached cruising altitude. People began to move about the cabin. The drink service started. Normal, everyday activities that suddenly seemed like elaborate performances. Distractions from what was really happening. Flight attendant Lee appeared beside her row again. "Would any of you care for a beverage?" The gray-haired woman requested tomato juice. The young man asked for ginger ale. "Water, please," May managed to say, her mouth dessert dry. As Lee poured the drinks, May noticed his hands. Steady, careful hands. Hands that knew things. What did those hands know that she didn't? "Here you are," he said, passing her a plastic cup of water. Their fingers brushed briefly and May flinched. "Thank you," she whispered. Then, unable to stop herself, "Do you feel it too?" Lee paused, his professional smile faltering slightly. "Feel what, ma'am?" May looked around the cabin, at all the passengers drinking their beverages, reading their magazines, watching their movies. None of them seemed concerned. None of them seemed to feel the wrongness that hummed through her body like an electrical current. "Nothing," she said. "Never mind." Lee moved on to the next row, but May noticed him glance back at her once, twice. She was being noticed, observed. Was that good or bad? She couldn't tell anymore. The water helped ground her temporarily. The cool liquid sliding down her throat reminded her of swimming in mountain lakes as a child, of simple pleasures, of times before her mind became a labyrinth she couldn't navigate. An hour passed. May tried to read a magazine, but the words jumbled together, rearranging themselves into messages meant only for her. She closed her eyes, hoping for a moment of rest, but behind her eyelids danced vivid images. Her sister waiting at the airport, arms open, not knowing what was coming. Not knowing what May knew, and what did May know. The thought slipped away before she could grasp it, like trying to hold water in cupped hands. "Excuse me," she said to the young man beside her. "I need to use the restroom." He stood to let her out. May walked unsteadily down the aisle, feeling the plane shift beneath her feet. Was that normal turbulence or something else? The bathroom at the rear of the plane was occupied. May waited, aware of flight attendant Lee watching her from his jump seat. "It's a long flight," she said, the words tumbling out unbidden. "To New York, long way to go." Lee nodded politely. "About 3 more hours, 3 hours. 180 minutes. 10,800 seconds. Each one stretching into infinity. Each one bringing them closer to what May couldn't remember now. But it was important. The most important thing. The bathroom door opened. May slipped inside, locking the door behind her. The tiny space felt safe, contained. She splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection. The woman looking back had wild eyes and pale skin. Was that really her? Had she always looked this way? When May emerged from the bathroom, the world had shifted again. The cabin lights seemed to pulse with hidden meanings. Conversations around her contained coded messages. As she made her way back to her seat, she felt certain that something was about to happen. Something big. She just needed to figure out what it was before it was too late. 2 hours into the flight, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. Nothing serious, just a gentle rocking that barely caused the overhead bins to creak. But to May Lin, it felt like confirmation. The universe was sending her signals, and this was just one more. May had been sitting rigidly in her seat since returning from the bathroom, barely touching the small bag of pretzels the flight attendants had distributed. The older woman by the window had fallen asleep, her book resting open on her lap. The young man in the middle seat was watching a movie on his tablet, wireless earbuds blocking out the world around him. None of them knew. None of them could see what May saw. The restlessness that had been building inside her for days now reached a breaking point. Her thoughts weren't just racing anymore, they were screaming, demanding action. The message she'd been trying to piece together suddenly seemed crystal clear. Something terrible was waiting at their destination, and only she could prevent it. Without consciously deciding to move, May found herself standing in the aisle. "Ma'am, is everything okay?" A flight attendant, a woman with a tightly braided ponytail and a name tag that read Anita, approached her with a professionally concerned smile. "We're still experiencing some turbulence. I need to ask you to return to your seat." "You don't understand," May said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, higher, faster than normal. "We can't land in New York, it's not safe." Anita's smile remained, but her eyes sharpened with alertness. "Ma'am, I assure you everything is fine. We've received no alerts about any issues in New York." "Because they don't know yet," May's voice rose. Several nearby passengers looked up from their books and screens. "I've been seeing the signs for days. The patterns. It's all connected." Flight attendant Lee appeared at Anita's side, his presence calm, but his body positioned to block the aisle leading toward the front of the plane. "Why don't we talk about this over here?" Lee suggested, gesturing toward the rear galley where they'd be away from other passengers. His voice was gentle but firm. May shook her head. The fog of confusion that had surrounded her thoughts was burning away now, replaced by an overwhelming clarity. Every instinct told her she needed to act fast. "The pilot needs to know," she insisted. "We need to land somewhere else." "Anywhere else." A ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin as more passengers became aware of the situation. The young man who had been sitting next to May removed his earbuds and was watching with a mixture of concern and wariness. "Ma'am, please lower your voice," Anita said quietly. "You're disturbing the other passengers." "They should be disturbed," May shot back. The words poured out of her in a torrent now. "Everyone's just sitting here like everything's normal, but it's not. Can't you feel it? The air pressure is wrong. The engine sounds different. And the clouds, did you see the pattern they made as we took off? It was a warning." Lai exchanged a quick glance with Anita. In that silent communication, a decision was made. Lee pressed the intercom button on the nearby wall. "Could we get some assistance in the main cabin, please?" His voice was casual, but the coded message was clear to the crew. A third flight attendant, a broad-shouldered man named Trey, appeared from the first-class section. As the three crew members formed a loose triangle around her, May felt a surge of panic. "You're not listening to me," she cried, loud enough now that every passenger on the plane could hear her. "We're all in danger. There's a reason I'm on this flight today. I'm supposed to deliver this message." "What exactly is the danger, ma'am?" Lee asked calmly. "Help us understand." May tried to organize her thoughts, but they slipped away like minnows in a stream, visible for a moment, then gone before she could grasp them. She knew with absolute certainty that disaster waited in New York, but the specifics kept shifting in her mind. Was it a bomb? A structural failure in the airport? A terrorist? The details didn't matter, only the overwhelming sense of impending catastrophe. "I just know," she said finally, her voice breaking. "I can feel it. We're all going to die if this plane lands in New York." A visible shudder went through the cabin. A child a few rows back began to cry. "That's enough," Trey said firmly. "You need to return to your seat now." May looked around desperately. None of the faces looking back at her showed understanding, only fear, annoyance, or pity. Why couldn't they see what was so obvious to her? How could they all be so blind? In that moment of frustration, she made a decision. If they wouldn't listen to her, she would speak directly to the pilots. They would understand. They had to. May lunged forward, pushing past Trey toward the front of the plane. She made it 3 steps before Lee blocked her path. "The cockpit," she gasped. "I need to get to the cockpit." "They need to know." "Ma'am, that's not going to happen," Lee said, his voice still calm but his stance unyielding. "I need you to stop and think about what you're doing right now." May tried to sidestep him, but Anita was there too, her small frame surprisingly solid. Passengers watched in shocked silence as the confrontation unfolded. "Please," May begged, tears streaming down her face now. "You have to believe me. I wouldn't say this if it wasn't true." "I believe that you believe it," Lee said, his voice softening slightly. "But I need you to consider something else. Is it possible that what you're feeling isn't about the flight at all?" May froze. Something in his tone, in the gentle way he was looking at her, broke through the certainty that had been driving her. "What do you mean?" she whispered. "When was the last time you slept properly?" Lee asked. "Have you been taking any medications recently? Or maybe stopped taking them?" The questions hit her like a physical blow. Fragments of reason began to pierce through the wall of delusion she'd built around herself. The prescription bottle on her nightstand, her doctor's warnings, the gradually escalating paranoia of the past 3 weeks. I stopped my medication," she admitted, the words coming out in a ragged whisper. "The side effects were too much. I thought I could handle it." The admission seemed to drain the last of her energy. May's knees buckled and Lee and Anita caught her before she could fall. They helped her to a nearby empty seat, away from staring passengers. "How long ago did you stop?" Anita asked, kneeling beside the seat. 3 weeks, May said, her voice small. "My doctor said, she said it could cause problems if I stopped suddenly, but I didn't realize." The frantic energy that had propelled her was evaporating, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion and creeping shame. The absolute certainty of moments ago now seemed distant and dreamlike. "What's happening to me?" she asked, more to herself than to the crew members. "Your brain chemistry is probably readjusting," Lee explained gently. "When you stop certain medications abruptly, it can cause your thoughts and perceptions to change." Trey had moved away and was speaking quietly into a phone at the back of the plane. May knew he was talking to the captain. The realization of what she'd done, the panic she'd caused, began to sink in. "Are they going to arrest me?" she asked, fresh tears welling up. "The captain is going to make some decisions about how to handle the situation," Anita said diplomatically. "But right now our priority is making sure you're okay and that everyone on the flight is safe." May nodded miserably. The voices in the cabin had settled into a nervous murmur. She couldn't bear to look at the other passengers, couldn't face their judgment or fear. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I really thought it all seemed so real." "That's how delusions work," Lee said. "They don't feel like delusions when you're in them." Trey returned from his call with the captain. "We're diverting to Pittsburgh," he informed his colleagues quietly. "Approximately 40 minutes out. Medical personnel will meet us at the gate." May's heart sank further. "My sister will be waiting in New York. She doesn't know." A sob caught in her throat. "We'll make sure someone contacts her," Anita assured her. "Do you have her number?" May nodded and fumbled for her phone, hands shaking as she unlocked it and found her sister's contact information. As Anita wrote down the number, Lee noticed something on May's wrist. A thin medical bracelet partially hidden by her sleeve. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to her wrist. When May nodded, he gently turned the bracelet to read the inscription. "You have bipolar disorder." It wasn't a question, but May answered anyway. "Type 1. With occasional psychotic features during manic episodes." The clinical words felt strange in her mouth, detached from the hurricane of emotions and certainties that had consumed her just minutes before. "That explains a lot," Lee said without judgment. "The stopping medication, the lack of sleep, the intense beliefs." "I haven't slept more than 2 hours a night for almost a week," May admitted. "Everything just seemed so important, so urgent. I had so many ideas, so many connections I was making." As the crew discussed what to do for the remainder of the flight, May stared out the window at the clouds below. They no longer seemed to hold secret messages or warnings. They were just clouds, water vapor suspended in the atmosphere, nothing more. The clarity of psychosis was giving way to the clarity of awareness, and with it came a crushing weight of embarrassment and regret. What had she done? How many people had she frightened? How many resources were now being diverted because of her? "It's going to be okay," Lee told her, as if reading her thoughts. "This happens more often than you might think. You're not the first person to have a medical emergency on a plane." But May knew that what had just happened would follow her long after this flight ended. The healing and the making amends was just beginning. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, deliberately calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a medical situation on board, we will be making an unscheduled landing in Pittsburgh. Our estimated arrival time is approximately 35 minutes from now. Flight attendants will be coming through the cabin to prepare for landing. We apologize for any inconvenience and thank you for your understanding." A medical situation. The words echoed in May's mind as she sat isolated in the last row of the plane, The crew had relocated her away from other passengers, partly for her privacy, partly for their peace of mind. Flight attendant Anita sat beside her, while Lee and Trey had returned to their regular duties, reassuring worried passengers and preparing for the early landing. "Can I get you some water?" Anita asked, her voice professional but kind. May nodded, unable to meet her eyes. The manic energy that had propelled her earlier had completely drained away, leaving behind a hollow exhaustion and creeping shame. Her thoughts, which had raced like wild horses, now trudged like weary travelers through mud. This crash was familiar. She had experienced it before, but never in such a public, humiliating way. Anita pressed a button to call another flight attendant. A young woman May hadn't seen before appeared with a cup of water and a small pill cup. The captain radioed ahead to medical control, Anita explained. "The doctor authorized us to offer you a mild sedative from our emergency kit if you'd like. It might help you feel calmer for the landing and whatever comes after." May stared at the small white pill in the cup, a familiar sight. Medication to control her mind, to quiet the storm. The very thing she had rejected 3 weeks ago. "I'll take it," she whispered. What was the point in refusing now? The damage was done. As the pill dissolved on her tongue, bitter and chalky, May gazed out the window. Below, the landscape was shifting from rural to suburban as they approached Pittsburgh. Normal lives unfolding in those thousands of little houses. People who woke up, took their medication, went to work, came home without ever becoming the center of an aviation emergency. "What's going to happen to me?" May finally asked, voicing the question that had been circling in her mind. Anita straightened her uniform cuff, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Medical personnel will board the plane first to assess you. After that, it depends on their evaluation. Will I be arrested?" "This isn't a criminal matter," Anita said firmly. "It's a health emergency. You didn't harm anyone or damage any property." "But I scared everyone," May said, glancing toward the front of the plane where passengers were stealing curious glances back at her. "I disrupted the flight. I caused an expensive diversion. You're not the first person to experience a mental health crisis in the air, and you won't be the last," Anita replied. "Airlines have protocols for these situations." The sedative was beginning to take effect, softening the sharp edges of May's anxiety. The crushing weight of shame remained, but it felt slightly more manageable. In the strange bubble of the airplane's last row, she found herself wanting to explain, not to excuse what had happened, but to make sense of it. "I've lived with this condition for 12 years, she said quietly. "Most of the time, with medication, therapy, and routine, I'm completely stable. People who know me would never guess I have bipolar disorder. I teach 3rd grade. I volunteer at an animal shelter on weekends. I have a normal life." Anita listened, her face showing neither pity nor judgment, just attentive professionalism. "What happened?" she asked. "The side effects from my medication got worse recently," May explained. "Weight gain, tremors, feeling emotionally numb. My doctor was out on maternity leave, and I convinced myself I was strong enough to stop taking them until we could try something new." She shook her head, the motion feeling slow and heavy. "Classic mistake. Everyone with bipolar knows you never stop your meds without medical supervision. Never. Hindsight is always clearer," Anita offered. "I should have recognized the warning signs. The decreased need for sleep. The burst of creativity. The feeling of special connection to everything around me." May traced a pattern in the condensation on her water cup. "But mania feels good at first, like you're finally seeing the world in bright colors after living in black and white. It's only when it spins out of control that it becomes—" She gestured weakly at herself. "This." The fasten seatbelt sign dinged on. Through the window, May could see the Pittsburgh cityscape growing larger as they descended. "We'll be landing soon," Anita said, checking that May's seatbelt was secure. "Try to take some deep breaths." As the plane began its final approach, May found herself thinking about her sister waiting in New York. Penny would be at the airport by now, perhaps already wondering why the flight status had changed to diverted. Would she be worried? Angry, disappointed. Their relationship had weathered May's condition before, but it always left scars. The landing gear deployed with a mechanical thunk that vibrated through the cabin. May gripped the armrests as the ground rushed up to meet them. The touchdown was smooth, the pilots compensating for crosswinds with practiced skill. As they taxied toward a gate, May noticed something unusual through the window. Flashing lights of emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. "That's quite a welcome committee," she said, her voice small. "Standard procedure," Anita assured her. "They respond to all medical diversions." After the plane came to a complete stop, the captain made another announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have arrived at Gate A7 in Pittsburgh International Airport. We ask that you please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened while medical personnel board the aircraft. We'll begin deplaning as soon as possible after that. Again, we appreciate your patience and understanding." An uncomfortable silence fell over the cabin. May could feel the weight of stares, could almost hear the whispered speculations. The passenger who caused the emergency. The crazy woman who thought the plane was in danger. The cabin door opened and 3 people in uniforms boarded, 2 paramedics and an airport police officer. They spoke briefly with Trey at the front of the plane before making their way down the aisle toward the last row. May's heart pounded despite the sedative. This was real. This was happening. "Hello, Ms. Lynn," said one of the paramedics, a woman with short gray hair and kind eyes. "I'm Diane with Pittsburgh Emergency Medical Services. We understand you're experiencing some difficulties today. Would it be all right if we asked you a few questions?" May nodded, fighting back tears. "Can you tell me your full name and date of birth?" "May Lynn, February 18th, 1987. "Do you know where you are right now?" "On a plane that was supposed to go to New York but is now in Pittsburgh because I had," May hesitated, "because I had a manic episode with psychotic features." The paramedics exchanged glances, clearly surprised by her clinical self-awareness. "I've been diagnosed with bipolar I disorder for 12 years, May explained. "I recognize what happened. I stopped taking my medication 3 weeks ago, and this is the result. Are you currently feeling any urges to harm yourself or others?" "No," May said firmly. "The delusions about the plane being in danger have passed. Now I'm just exhausted and embarrassed." The questions continued about her medical history, current symptoms, whether she was under a doctor's care. May answered mechanically, the routine familiar from previous hospitalizations. The officer stood back, observing but not participating. Finally, Diane, the paramedic, said, "Ms. Lynn, we believe you would benefit from a psychiatric evaluation at the hospital. Would you be willing to go voluntarily?" May looked around the plane. The other passengers were still waiting, still watching. Flight attendants were standing by, their faces carefully neutral. Through the window she could see airport workers unloading luggage, the normal business of the airport continuing despite the drama unfolding inside. "Yes," she said, "I'll go voluntarily." Relief visibly passed through everyone within earshot. No need for restraints, no forced removal. The officer stepped back further, his posture relaxing. "Can I make one request?" May asked, her voice stronger now. "Of course," Diane replied. "I'd like to apologize to the other passengers before I leave." The paramedics hesitated. "That's not usually—" "Please," May said. "I need to do this." After a brief consultation, they agreed. Diane handed May a small microphone connected to the plane's intercom system. With trembling hands, May took it, gathering her courage. Hello," she began, her voice echoing through the cabin. "My name is May. I'm the reason we had to land in Pittsburgh today." She paused, swallowing hard. "I want to apologize to all of you for the disruption and any fear I may have caused. I have a medical condition that I didn't manage properly, and it resulted in the behavior you witnessed. I'm truly sorry for delaying your journeys and for any distress I created." The cabin remained silent, but May noticed something shift in the faces watching her. The wariness in some eyes softened. A few people nodded in understanding. "Thank you for your patience," she concluded, "and for the kindness shown by the crew during this difficult situation." As she handed back the microphone, an unexpected sound broke the silence, applause. Not from everyone, but from enough passengers to matter. It wasn't celebratory applause, but something more meaningful, acknowledgement of human frailty, of courage and vulnerability. Flight attendant Lee appeared beside her with a small travel bag. "We retrieved your carry-on," he said, handing it to her. "The rest of your luggage will be transferred to your final destination." "Thank you," May said. "For everything. You were all so professional even when I was at my worst." "That's our job," Lee replied. But his eyes conveyed more than his words. "Take care of yourself, Ms. Lynn." As the paramedics prepared to escort her from the plane, May took one last look around the cabin. This space that had felt like a trap just hours ago now seemed almost like a sanctuary, a place where she had fallen apart but also where she had begun to piece herself back together. With a deep breath, May stood and followed the paramedics toward the exit, toward whatever would come next. The fluorescent lights of Pittsburgh Memorial Hospital's emergency psychiatric unit hummed overhead as May Lin sat on the edge of an examination bed. The thin paper crinkled beneath her each time she shifted. The sedative given to her on the plane had worn off, leaving behind a hollow-eyed exhaustion that reached down to her bones. "Just a few more questions," said Dr. Chen, a psychiatrist with salt and pepper hair and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He'd been kind but thorough in his evaluation, asking May to recount the events on the plane, her medication history, her support systems. "When did you first notice the changes in your thinking after stopping your medication?" he asked, his pen poised over a clipboard. May thought back through the foggy timeline of the past few weeks. "It was gradual at first. About 5 days after stopping, I started sleeping less, maybe 6 hours, then 4, then barely 2. I felt energized, though, creative. I started a huge art project at 2 a.m. one night, reorganized my entire apartment the next." Dr. Chen nodded. "That's typical for the beginning of a manic episode. The decreased need for sleep is often the first warning sign. What happened next?" My thoughts started racing. I jumped from one idea to another. I talked faster, called friends at odd hours with what I thought were brilliant insights. May twisted the hospital bracelet on her wrist. Then came the connections, seeing patterns everywhere, coincidences that seemed meaningful, and finally, the certainty about the plane, the absolute conviction that I understood something no one else did. "Delusions often feel like special knowledge or insight," Dr. Chen said, not unkindly. "The brain is creating meaning where there isn't any, but it feels completely real to the person experiencing it." May nodded, then asked the question that had been weighing on her. "Am I going to be admitted?" Dr. Chen set down his clipboard. "Yes, I believe that's the best course of action right now. Your presentation is consistent with an acute manic episode with psychotic features. We need to stabilize you on medication and monitor your response before clearing you for travel." Though she'd expected this answer, it still hit hard.
"How long?"
"Typically 3 to 5 days for initial stabilization, though it could be longer depending on how quickly we find the right medication balance." "You mentioned you were having side effects from your previous regimen?" "Yes, that's why I stopped taking it." "We'll work on finding a better option for you," Dr. Chen assured her. "Psychiatric medication isn't one size fits all. Sometimes it takes adjustments to find the right fit." After signing the voluntary admission paperwork, May was escorted to the inpatient unit. The heavy door closed behind her with a final sounding click. The nurse who'd guided her there, a woman named Vicky with colorful scrubs and a no-nonsense manner, showed her to a sparse but clean room. "Bathroom's there," Vicky said, pointing to a door, "shared with the room next door. We do checks every 15 minutes during the day, 30 at night. Group therapy starts at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Any questions?" May had 1,000 questions, but couldn't form any of them into words. She simply shook her head. "Try to get some rest," Vicky advised. "First night's always the hardest." Alone in the room, May sat on the edge of the thin mattress, finally allowing herself to cry. Not the frantic tears from the plane, but deep, body-shaking sobs of relief mixed with grief. Relief that the worst was over. The delusions, the public spectacle, the uncertainty of what would happen. Grief for the disruption to her carefully constructed life, for the shame that would follow her home. She thought of her sister, Penny, and suddenly remembered she hadn't spoken to her yet. Through her tears, May managed to ask a passing staff member about making a phone call. 20 minutes later, she was seated at a phone in the hallway, listening to the ring on the other end. "Hello?" Penny's voice sounded tense, worried. "Pen, it's me," May said, her voice cracking. "May, oh my God, where are you? The airline said your flight was diverted to Pittsburgh for a passenger medical emergency, and I've been going out of my mind thinking it was you." "It was me," May admitted. "I'm in the hospital." A beat of silence. "What happened?" "I stopped taking my meds 3 weeks ago," May said, the words coming out in a rush. "I had a manic episode on the plane. Full psychotic break. Thought the plane was in danger. Made a huge scene." "Oh, May," Penny breathed, her voice a mixture of sympathy and exasperation. Why didn't you tell me you were stopping your medication? Because you would have talked me out of it, May said, a hint of her old stubbornness surfacing. And you would have been right. To her surprise, Penny laughed, a small, sad sound. Well, at least your self-awareness is coming back. Her tone grew serious again. Are you okay? I mean, physically? I'm fine. Just exhausted and embarrassed. They're admitting me for a few days to get me stabilized on new meds. I'll come to you, Penny said immediately. I'll find a flight to Pittsburgh tonight. No, don't, May protested. There's nothing you can do here. I'll just be sleeping and going to groups and meeting with doctors. Save your money and time off work. I'll call you every day, I promise. They talked for a few more minutes, making plans for when May would eventually make it to New York. When she hung up, May felt both lighter and heavier, relieved to have connected with her sister, but weighed down by the realization of how much worry she'd caused. Back in her room, May found a set of hospital pajamas had been left for her. She changed, placed her clothes in the small dresser, and lay down on the bed staring at the acoustic tile ceiling. Outside her door, she could hear the rhythmic sounds of the unit, the squeak of nurses' shoes, the muted conversations, the occasional announcement over the intercom. The familiar soundtrack of psychiatric wards everywhere. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, a different nurse was gently shaking her shoulder. Ms. Lynn? Sorry to wake you, but you have a visitor. May blinked in confusion. A visitor? But I don't know anyone in Pittsburgh. He says he's from the airline. Normally we wouldn't allow non-family visitors so soon, but Dr. Chen approved it because it's related to the incident. Anxiety fluttered in May's chest. Was this about legal issues? Costs for the diversion? Banning her from future flights? She quickly smoothed her hair and followed the nurse to a small meeting room off the main hallway. Sitting at the table, dressed in everyday clothes rather than a uniform, was Flight Attendant Lee. Mr. Lee, May said, surprise evident in her voice. He stood, offering a small smile. Just Lee is fine. I'm off duty now. What are you doing here? I had a 24-hour layover in Pittsburgh anyway, he explained. Thought I'd check on you, see if you needed anything. May was stunned. You came to see me? After everything I put you and your crew through? Lee gestured for her to sit down across from him. In my 15 years as a flight attendant, I've seen all kinds of human drama at 30,000 feet. Medical emergencies, panic attacks, drunk passengers, even a childbirth once. I bet none of them thought the plane was doomed, May said grimly. Actually, you'd be surprised how common fear of flying is, Lee replied. Your situation was medical, not behavioral. There's a difference. May studied him, trying to understand why he was really there. Did the airline send you to make sure I don't sue or something? Lee laughed. No, nothing like that. The airline doesn't even know I'm here. This is just human to human. Why? Lee seemed to consider his words carefully. When you apologized on the plane, it was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. Most people in crisis don't have that kind of self-awareness or consideration for others. He paused. And something you said stuck with me. About living with your condition for 12 years, having a normal life, teaching children. What about it? My nephew was diagnosed with bipolar disorder last year, Lee said. He's 18, just starting college. He's struggling with the diagnosis. Feels like his life is over before it's begun. I thought hearing about someone who's managed it successfully might help him. If you felt like sharing your perspective, that is. Understanding dawned on May. You want me to talk to him? Only if you're comfortable with it. No pressure, May sat back. Emotions colliding inside her. Surprise, gratitude, a strange sense of purpose emerging from the wreckage of the past 24 hours. I'd be happy to talk with him, she said finally. When I'm a bit more stable, obviously, Lee smiled. Thank you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small paper bag. I brought you something else, too. Hospital food isn't known for its quality. Inside the bag were a chocolate bar, a paperback mystery novel, and a small notebook with a pen. The book is to pass the time, Lee explained. The notebook is because, well, creative people often need to express themselves, even in places like this. Just maybe focus on happier themes for now. May felt tears well up again, but these were different. Tears of gratitude for this small kindness from someone who had every reason to avoid her. Thank you, she whispered. Lee stayed for nearly an hour. They talked about his 15 years of flying, enough strange stories to fill a book. About May's third-grade class, 28 kids with more energy than sense. About her history with bipolar disorder and the strategies she'd developed for managing it. By the time he left, promising to check in before his flight the next day, May felt something she hadn't expected to feel in the psychiatric unit, a spark of connection to the world outside. That night, as May lay in bed listening to the quiet beeps and murmurs of the hospital at night, she found herself thinking about the unlikely intersection of her life with the crew of Flight 2187. How her worst moment had revealed surprising compassion from strangers. How even this breakdown, public and humiliating as it was, might somehow serve a purpose if it helped Lee's nephew understand his own condition. For the first time since the episode began, May felt a glimmer of what might be hope. Not that this would be easy. The road back to stability never was. Not that there wouldn't be consequences to face when she returned home. But that perhaps, as had happened before in her life, she could eventually weave even this dark thread into the larger tapestry of her recovery. May opened the notebook Lee had given her and began to write. Not about delusions or disasters or fears, but about resilience, about beginning again, about finding unexpected kindness at 30,000 feet. 6 months had passed since the incident on Flight 2187. Lynn stood at the front of a conference room in the airline's regional training center, her hands only slightly trembling as she adjusted the microphone clipped to her blouse. "My name is May Lynn," she began, looking out at the faces of 30 flight attendants watching her with varying degrees of curiosity. "And 6 months ago, I was the passenger who had to be detained on a flight from Denver to New York because I was experiencing a manic episode with psychotic features." In the front row, Lee gave her an encouraging nod. Beside him sat Anita and Trey, the other flight attendants who had managed her crisis that day. They had become unexpected allies in May's recovery journey, particularly Lee, whose nephew now exchanged weekly texts with May about living with bipolar disorder. "I'm here today because your colleagues handled my medical emergency with such professionalism and compassion that it changed the course of my recovery," May continued. "And because my experience might help you recognize and respond to passengers experiencing mental health crises in the future." May had never imagined she would find herself here, voluntarily revisiting the most humiliating moment of her life in front of strangers. But when the airline's training department had reached out, after Lee suggested her story might be valuable, for their new mental health response training, something in her had recognized it as an opportunity for meaning-making. For the next hour, May walked the group through her experience. The gradual escalation of symptoms after stopping her medication, the growing paranoia, the absolute certainty that something terrible would happen if the plane landed in New York. She described how the flight attendants' responses had either helped or hindered her in that vulnerable state. When Anita asked me what exactly the danger was, "It actually helped pierce through my delusions," May explained. "Because in that moment I had to confront the fact that while I felt certain there was danger, I couldn't articulate what it was. That created a tiny crack in my conviction, a moment of doubt." Anita, sitting in the front row, looked surprised. "I was just trying to get information," she admitted. "I didn't realize it might help you." "That's what today is about," May smiled. "Understanding how your responses affect someone in crisis, even when that wasn't your intention." After her presentation during the break, a young flight attendant approached May at the refreshment table. "That was really brave," she said, pouring coffee into a paper cup. "Talking about something so personal." "It doesn't feel brave," May replied honestly. "It just feels necessary. Mental health crises happen everywhere, including at 30,000 feet. My brother has schizophrenia," the young woman offered quietly. "What you said about how real delusions feel, that helped me understand him better." This had happened repeatedly in the months since May had begun speaking openly about her experience, people sharing their own connections to mental illness, often in hushed tones as if revealing secrets. Each time it reinforced her decision to transform her most painful moment into a tool for education. Later that evening, after the training session had ended, May joined Lee, Anita, and Trey for dinner at a restaurant near the training center. The four of them made an unlikely group, 3 flight crew members and the passenger who had once been their mid-air emergency. But over the past 6 months, a genuine friendship had formed. "To May," Lee said, raising his glass in a toast, "for turning a crisis into an opportunity for change." May felt her cheeks warm with embarrassment, but she accepted the toast with a small nod. The airline's new mental health response protocols will help so many passengers. I'm just glad something good came from my experience. Speaking of good things, Anita said, how's the new medication working? You seem really well. Much better, May confirmed. The new combination has fewer side effects, and I've got a great psychiatrist now. Plus, I've been religious about sleep hygiene, stress management, all the boring but essential maintenance stuff. And the teaching? Trey asked. You went back to your class? This had been one of May's biggest fears during those dark days in the hospital, that her very public breakdown would cost her the job she loved. She took a sip of water before answering. I did go back, but it was complicated. The principal was supportive, but some parents were concerned once they heard what happened. That's not fair, Anita frowned. You had a medical emergency. I know, but I understand their perspective too. Their children are precious to them. May traced a pattern in the condensation on her water glass. In the end, we worked out a compromise. I took a month of medical leave to fully stabilize, agreed to documentation from my doctor confirming I was fit to return, and now I check in regularly with the school counselor. It's actually created a good support system. What May didn't mention was the awkward parent-teacher conferences, the whispers that sometimes followed her in the school hallway, the way some colleagues still treated her like she might shatter. Those wounds were healing more slowly. And your students? Lee asked. At this, May's expression brightened. Kids are amazing. They just wanted to know if I was okay and if I'd still be organizing the science fair. One of them made me a card that said, "Get well soon," with a drawing of a brain wearing a Band-Aid. The table erupted in laughter, the kind that comes from finding humor in the journey through difficulty. As they shared their meals and stories, May felt a wave of gratitude for these people who had seen her at her absolute worst and still chose to see her potential. I have something to share, she said when there was a lull in conversation. I've been accepted to a master's program in counseling psychology. Part-time so I can still teach, but I want to specialize in helping people navigate mental health diagnoses, especially bipolar disorder. That's wonderful, Lee said warmly. When do you start? January. I'm nervous but excited. My own experiences will inform my practice, both the mistakes and the successes. Speaking of success, Trey said, pulling an envelope from his jacket pocket. We have something for you. From everyone on the crew that day, May accepted the envelope with surprise. Inside was a card signed by all the flight attendants and pilots from Flight 2187, along with a small silver keychain shaped like wings. We give these to children taking their first flight, Anita explained, to remind them that they're brave. We thought you deserved one too. Tears welled in May's eyes as she ran her fingers over the smooth metal wings. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything, Lee assured her. Just keep doing what you're doing, turning turbulence into lift. Later that night, in her hotel room, May sat cross-legged on the bed and opened her journal. The same notebook Lee had given her in the hospital 6 months earlier, now nearly full of entries tracking her recovery. She wrote about the day's training session, the dinner with her new friends, the unexpected gift. At the end, she added, 6 months ago today, I thought I was going to die on that plane. Instead, I found a new way to live. The next morning, May checked out of the hotel and headed to the airport for her flight home. As she approached the security checkpoint, she felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that had accompanied air travel since the incident. Though she had flown successfully several times in the past 6 months, each trip required courage and careful preparation. This time, she had all her medications in their original bottles, a letter from her doctor explaining her condition, her regular relaxation techniques, and a fully charged phone loaded with calming music and meditation apps. She also wore the wing keychain on a cord around her neck, a tangible reminder of how far she had come. At the gate, May took several deep breaths before boarding. The plane was similar to Flight 2187, same airline, similar size and configuration. As she made her way down the aisle to her seat, she made brief eye contact with the flight attendants, wondering if they could somehow sense her history. Welcome aboard, said one, a woman with a bright smile. Can I help you find your seat? 14C, May replied, the coincidence of it being the same seat number as that fateful day not lost on her. And could I ask you something? Of course. I have bipolar disorder, May said quietly, showing the medical alert bracelet she now wore willingly. I'm stable and have all my medication, but sometimes flying makes me anxious because of a previous episode. I just wanted you to know. 6 months ago, May would have hidden her condition at all costs, buried it beneath layers of shame and secrecy. Now she understood that visibility was part of her healing, and perhaps part of changing how the world viewed mental illness. The flight attendant's smile never wavered. Thank you for letting me know. I'll make a note for the crew to check in with you during the flight, and please don't hesitate to press your call button if you need anything. As May settled into her seat, she felt none of the paranoia or racing thoughts that had plagued her that day 6 months ago. Instead, she felt the quieter emotions of recovery, pride in her progress, gratitude for the support that had carried her through, and hope for the person she was becoming. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming passengers aboard. May fastened her seatbelt, closed her eyes, and focused on her breathing as the plane began to taxi. She was not just a passenger today. She was not just a teacher or a student or a person with bipolar disorder. She was all of these things and more. A survivor who had found purpose in her pain, a bridge between worlds. A storyteller helping others understand the landscape of mental illness from the inside out. As the plane accelerated down the runway and lifted into the sky, May opened her eyes and watched the ground fall away below. Feeling not fear but a profound sense of possibility, she was rising in more ways than one.